In 1992, a college student at the University of Southern California watched the Los Angeles skyline turn orange. The Rodney King verdict had just come down. The riots started. And something crystallized in that young woman from Chicago who had come west to study political science. Accountability only meant something if you actually demanded it. From people in power, in person, on the record. So she did. She worked with nonprofits that rebuilt broken neighborhoods after the fires died down. She got appointed to the LA County Commission on Children and Families. She won a seat on the Los Angeles Community College Board. She got herself elected to the California State Assembly in 2018, the California State Senate in 2021, the United States House of Representatives in 2023, and she landed on the House Foreign Affairs Committee, the committee with direct jurisdiction over the Secretary of State of the United States, the committee where accountability either happens or it doesn't. Her name is Representative Sidney Kamlager-Dove. And on June 3, 2026, she walked into a congressional hearing room with $8 billion in unanswered questions on the table and 5 minutes to ask them. She spent all 5 minutes talking. Then she walked out before the answer came. "Well, thank you for coming," Secretary of State Marco Rubio said as she disappeared into the hallway. What happened in that hearing room is only half the story. The half that matters more is buried in a story published 4 months earlier, a story that tells you exactly why she didn't actually need Rubio to answer. The receipts already existed, in the newspaper, in black and white. So here's how June 3rd actually played out. The House Foreign Affairs Committee was holding a budget hearing on the State Department's FY 2027 spending request. Marco Rubio was there. Every Democrat on the committee had one subject on their mind: Venezuela. Specifically, the $8 billion in Venezuelan oil the United States had been selling since January, when Delta Force operators captured Nicolas Maduro at 2 a.m. and Trump told the country, "I'm going to run Venezuela." That oil money was now flowing through accounts the Trump administration controlled, and Congress had almost zero visibility into where it was going. Representative Kamlager-Dove got her 5 minutes, and she came in hot. "Your credibility meter is on empty right now," she told Rubio. "This oil, who determines the barrels of oil that get sold? How many of them? At what price does it get sold? Where is it going? The onus is on you to prove there is no corruption happening." Rubio tried to answer, multiple times. "I can't say anything because you won't let me." She kept going. "You don't have this time yet." He tried again. She cut him off again. "We are 5 months into this and no audits, zero visibility into the contracts that are awarded, zero transparency about where the money is going." The room was watching Rubio try to get a word in for 5 straight minutes. It wasn't working. "I've had to use your time to answer their questions," he said. "What is this? You get asked questions for 5 minutes and you don't get time to answer. It's not a hearing. It's like a dunk tank." Then her time ran out. She stood up. She headed for the door, even as Rubio called after her. "Why is she leaving? I'm going to answer her questions." Something came back from the hallway, unclear. And Rubio delivered 4 words that were across every conservative news site before the hearing was over. "Well, thank you for coming." Representative Maria Salazar of Florida burst out laughing. So did the people behind Rubio. But here's the part nobody covering the viral clip is reporting. The second Kamlager-Dove cleared the doorway, Salazar immediately offered Rubio some of her time. And he started answering. Within roughly 30 seconds of the walkout, the questions Kamlager-Dove had spent 5 minutes demanding answers to, Rubio was giving them. Quarterly audits, a retrospective review from the beginning, on the record, in the same hearing, to the representative who stayed in the room. Kamlager-Dove walked out 30 seconds before the answers arrived. But that's not even the most damaging part of this story. Because what she was asking about, the transparency, the contracts, the accountability, the details had already been published on a specific date, in a specific newspaper, January 29th, 2026. And they are a lot more disturbing than anything Rubio said in that hearing. The fact that Rubio answered Salazar the moment Kamlager-Dove left isn't a minor footnote. It tells you something about the architecture of what happened in that room. Because you don't walk out of a hearing if your goal is information. You walk out of a hearing if your goal is a clip. The clip of you demanding answers is the deliverable. The actual answers are secondary. This isn't the first time Kamlager-Dove has turned a congressional hearing into a performance. In April 2025, she stood up during a subcommittee hearing and publicly accused a journalist of being a serial sexual harasser. On national television, on the record, in a committee room. The accusation was made. The clip existed. That was the point. She calls herself a fierce advocate for accountability. She built her California legislative career around legislation that replaced police response on nonviolent calls with trained community teams. The principle underneath it: the people with power should be accountable to the people without it. Systems should have oversight. Nobody operates above review. That's the career she built. That's the framework she ran on. And then she sat across from the Secretary of State on the committee specifically responsible for overseeing the State Department, with $8 billion of Venezuelan oil money flowing through accounts that nobody in Congress had audited. And she used 5 consecutive minutes to deliver a monologue. She told Rubio, "Giving contracts with no transparency is exactly the reason why you shut down USAID, so practice what you preach." That line deserved to be asked. The hypocrisy angle is real, but asking a question in a way that prevents the answer is not oversight. That's theater. There are 2 ways to pursue accountability. You can file formal letters to the Government Accountability Office requesting an independent audit, which Democrats had done 2 months before this hearing. You can introduce legislation requiring transparency mechanisms, which Senators Schumer and Schiff had done in April 2026 with the Venezuela Oil Proceeds Transparency Act. That formal machinery was already running by June 3rd, or you can get 5 minutes on CSPAN, make noise until time runs out, and leave. The January 29th story answered her core question. Who gets these contracts? In more specific detail than anything Rubio was going to volunteer in a committee hearing. She had the receipts for 4 months. So what was in them? Let's go back to January 3rd, 2026, 2 in the morning, Caracas, Venezuela. Delta Force operators hit a compound and walked out with Nicolas Maduro, the man who had ruled Venezuela for 13 years. They flew him to USS Iwo Jima and then to Brooklyn, where he appeared in federal court on narco-terrorism charges. Trump posted a photo. Maduro, blindfolded, gray Nike sweatsuit, plastic water bottle. Brilliant operation, Trump told the New York Times. Venezuela has the largest oil reserves in the world. Within days of Maduro's capture, Executive Order 14,373 designated Venezuelan oil proceeds as U.S.-controlled funds, deposited initially into an account at a bank in Qatar, then transferred to Treasury accounts. Trump posted on Truth Social, "The oil revenues will be controlled by me as President of the United States of America." They started selling Venezuelan oil immediately. By the day of the June 3rd hearing, the United States had sold close to 100 million barrels, an estimated $8 billion, in 5 months. Who handled those sales? The administration needed commodity traders fast. 2 companies received the first contracts, $500 million initial tranche. Their names, Vitol and Trafigura. Now here's what the Washington Post published on January 29th. Trafigura pleaded guilty to foreign bribery charges related to oil sales. Not accused, not under investigation. Pleaded guilty. Vitol entered a deferred prosecution agreement with the DOJ, admitted conduct related to bribery, agreed to oversight conditions to avoid prosecution. Both companies have bribery cases in their recent history that directly involve oil transactions. These are the 2 companies that received the first $500 million in Venezuelan oil contracts. And one more thing. The Financial Times reported that $250 million in proceeds went to Vitol specifically. A senior Vitol trader had donated $6 million to Trump PACs ahead of the 2024 election. $6 million in, $250 million out. Treasury Secretary Besant told Congress in February that no formal audit agreement was in place. As of June 3rd, Trafigura and Vitol were still operating in Venezuela, 5 months after Rubio called them a short-term fix. A third trader had since joined. No explanation given for any of it. $8 billion. Bribery convictions. A megadonors company with $6 million contributed and $250 million in contract proceeds. And the administration had published 0 contracts, 0 buyers, 0 audit results. The information Kamlager-Dove was demanding on June 3rd had been in the newspaper since January 29th. But here's what she didn't name in that hearing room. The full picture wasn't being assembled by anyone in Congress. It was assembled by someone else, published the same day she walked out, and they didn't have a camera. The Council on Foreign Relations is not a partisan institution. Its reports land on the desks of State Department officials and National Security Council staffers before the ink is dry. It doesn't do clips. It publishes analysis. And on June 3rd, 2026, the same day as the walkout, the CFR published a report on exactly this question. Their finding: in the first 4 months of U.S. control over Venezuelan oil exports, close to 100 million barrels worth an estimated $8 billion had flowed through a process marked by no transparency and minimal oversight. Trafigura and Vitol remained involved, 5 months in, with no public explanation. A third trader, G.E. Warren, had entered the picture. Nothing had been published about any of their roles. The CFR found it. On June 3rd, the same day, no CS-PAN required. Now connect the 4 blocks of this story. The $8 billion is confirmed. CFR. The bribery-linked contracts are confirmed. Washington Post, January 29th. The opacity is confirmed. Treasury Secretary Besant, February, before Congress. And the formal oversight mechanisms that could actually address it? Already moving. Legislation introduced. GAO audit requested. Letters with legal force sent for months. What Kamlager-Dove brought to the June 3rd hearing was a monologue about information that was already public, and an exit strategy that handed Rubio a punchline. The pattern: they knew the whole time. Not just the Trump administration, though they clearly did. The information was already out there. The formal oversight channels were already running. And in that hearing room, the choice being made wasn't between accountability and silence. It was between accountability and footage. But here's the one detail from that January 29th story that nobody in that room said out loud. The specific number that closes this whole thing out. $6 million. That's what the senior trader at Vitol, one of the 2 companies with a bribery history that received the first Venezuelan oil contract, donated to Trump's campaign PACs. The Financial Times reported that $250 million in Venezuelan oil proceeds went to Vitol. $6 million in, $250 million out. And Trafigura, which pleaded guilty to foreign oil bribery, is still operating there 5 months later. That was already in the newspaper. Since January 29th. That's what was buried in the story she already had. Here's the full picture. $8 billion in 5 months. Bribery convictions on both sides of the first contract. A $6 million donor whose company received $250 million in proceeds. 0 published audit results, 0 public contracts, and a congressional accountability process where one group of Democrats filed legislation and GAO requests through formal channels, and another came to a committee hearing, used 5 minutes for a monologue, denied the Secretary of State a response, then walked out before the answer arrived. The Council on Foreign Relations confirmed the transparency failure the same day. The machinery was already broken. The money was already flowing. The walkout didn't expose any of that. It generated a clip. You now know more about what actually happened in that hearing room and what was behind it than most of the people who shared the video. The verdict: $8 billion, bribery convictions, a megadonors contract, and a congresswoman who spent 30 years building her career on the word accountability, who walked out 30 seconds before the answer arrived. She watched the 1992 riots and decided her life would be about holding power responsible. On June 3, 2026, she had 5 minutes to do exactly that. She left before it happened. Subscribe and hit the bell. More of these breakdowns are coming, and you won't want to miss the next one. Drop a comment below. What was the moment in this story where it clicked for you?